The Curse of La Llorona is the latest film in the Conjuring universe, and if you're confused by that statement, don't worry, I was too when I looked up on Wikipedia a few weeks ago. I looked up this movie. I don't remember the reason why I did, but I did, and I just remember being confused when it said that it was the 6th installment in the Conjuring franchise, which I don't think was ever mentioned in the marketing campaign, and if it was, I definitely never saw it. But anyway, the film stars Linda Cardellini as this mother of two in 1970s Los Angeles, and her family have become the target of a demon known as La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, who is known for drowning children. Now, before we actually get into the video, I want to throw out a disclaimer that I always do before I actually get into my thoughts. So, for those of the uninitiated, those who've never seen any of my videos, the way that I break down my thoughts is I do a pro and con list. You know, the pros are everything that I liked about the movie, and then the cons are everything that are either lacking in quality or were just completely bad. And I do tend to, I try to keep the sections separate, but I do tend to transition between one another. And I actually have a feeling that I'm going to do it with this video quite a bit, where I'll use a pro to transition into a con or vice versa. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. Okay, there's your disclaimer. Let's go ahead and get into things. Starting with the pros, specifically, because I really want to get into the positives first before I get into the negatives of this movie, but I'm going to summarize the overall acting. The acting is without a doubt the best part of the movie as far as like a single aspect. Particularly with the family, everybody is giving their all. I mean, especially Cardellini, who plays this mother who works in Child Protective Services, which I actually think is a good way to explain how she gets into the mess of, basically what this film ends up being. And also the kids do a great job as well. They have, I don't know, the film focuses quite a bit on them. And if they don't give a good performance, then most of the film is wasted, but luckily they did a good job. Now, it's really a shame that all of these characters aren't written as well as the performances call for, though. However, my single favorite character, as far as how they're written, and not to mention the fact that the respective actor gives a really, really good performance, is Raphael, who's played by Raymond Cruz. Raymond Cruz was, for those of you who may actually remember him, he was in maybe the first season of Breaking Bad, maybe also the second, but he was one of the early drug lords that Heisenberg and Jesse went up against, and I don't know, he was on there for a little bit, but that's where I recognized him from. So, Raphael sort of fills in the role that you'd think the Warrens would in the Conjuring universe, just as somebody who's outside of the church, who has, handles the more supernatural cases, like exorcisms and just random demon visits, like that kind of thing. But he does a fine job at fitting in to this somewhat cliche role that we've been seeing quite a bit, especially in the Conjuring movies specifically. And what makes Raphael stand out, what makes him stand out from many of the other supernatural experts that you see in these kind of horror films is his cleverness when it comes to ways that he goes about trying to thwart La Llorona, and also the way that he brings humor into a situation. I'm always worried whenever a film of this kind of dark material, especially especially if you know anything about La Llorona, which I'll get into a little bit later, maybe, it just depends, but I'm always worried that this kind of dark horror film will try to put in humor and it won't work, but Cruz's dry delivery really makes it work. There are a few sequences that felt very well made and didn't feel like the filmmakers were relying heavily on jump scares, but rather some interesting editing and camera tricks, and even just some simple moments that can instill fear, and it felt, different. It felt refreshing in a way, especially since all we see these days is jump scares. I mean, there's one scene involving an umbrella opening and closing. I know that that's pretty vague, or not vague at all, but I didn't want to specify what it was. There's also a scene involving, it takes place inside of a car with the two main children, and that is probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. I know, again, I'm being vague, but I just don't want to go in and say like, oh yeah, expect this to start happening. No, I don't want to do that. Of course, these moments where it actually felt refreshing are few and far between, and the film does actually heavily rely on jump scares that are actually not too bad, and then ones that are just needless. Now, I've mentioned before in many of my reviews of horror films, especially recently when I did Pet Sematary, that I'm easily scared by anything. I am a total bitch when it comes to being scared. But I'm starting to build a slight tolerance, I think. But once I get a grasp of how the scares are crafted, it made it easier for me to sit through them, especially since, what was it? A lot of the jump scares in the movie are actually scarier in the trailers than they are actually in the movie, which is kind of odd, and it mostly has to do with how the trailer is edited together. Obviously, the trailer was edited a lot better than this movie, and also, there were many times where the scares would just be dragged out way too long, and I would become bored because of all the waiting. And listen, if it's an interesting jump scare, then I'll feel reinvigorated, but it's like, I knew when it was going to happen, I knew what was going to happen, so it really made it bored. And also, it felt like the writers and filmmakers didn't have much to put into the film to make the sequences terrifying or even, you know, unique and memorable. But if you even know a tiny bit of La Llorona, which is a real folklore, or a real folk tale in Mexico, which I know a little bit. I'm not saying that I'm an expert, but I'm at least familiar with the story. You know that there's a lot to this folk tale, a lot of creepiness that could have actually helped make it feel more unique and original, but they didn't do anything. They focused more on the cliche horror film. I'm going to throw this out here really quickly because this is actually going to tie to one of my biggest gripes about this movie. But I will say, I feel like I'm saying this way too much recently, but it does bear repeating. The core concept of the film, the story itself, not the script or anything else like that, but just the basic idea, honestly, it's very interesting, and it showed potential for a really good horror movie, what with it being a new type of story brought to life on the big screen. But everything is brought down, really, by the script itself. We're not given enough time to know these characters. Instead, we start the film with some throwaway dialogue explaining the mother's life before the start of the movie and how there's so much tragedy that I wish that they had just done it a simpler way instead of just a shit ton of exposition. Thus making it difficult to really connect with her character as well as the rest of her family, outside of, oh, I really feel bad that these people are going through this situation. Also, we get the whole thing we get the whole thing from other movies. Sorry, I had a brain fart for a second. We get a whole thing that we get from other movies where the main character goes to see a priest and then doesn't listen to the priest, and then sees that weird shit happens, goes back to the priest, and then the priest recommends somebody outside of the church who handles the supernatural things, and maybe they have unorthodox methods, which, by the way, that saying needs to die. You know, just find another interesting way of saying, this is a guy who doesn't play by the rules. And also, something that I hate about this movie, something that happens in a lot of horror movies, is that somebody will be attacked, and then they show signs that they've been attacked, or at least something's wrong, and instead of telling anybody, and I'm not just talking about the people outside of the family, they'll just lie about what happened, pretty much everybody, and this happens a lot. The boy will lie about what he saw and what happened to him, the girl will lie about, what happened and, what she saw. Even the mother does this, and it's actually almost in that order, where, the boy sees something, then the girl, then the mom, and nobody mentions it for the longest time in the movie, and I fucking hate that kind of thing. And it honestly made me think of those Screen Rant pitch meeting videos. You guys seen those? It's where they make fun of how a movie is made by going through every detail as though a guy is pitching the movie to somebody else. And, it was kind of like, wait, why are they not talking to each other about this? Wouldn't this resolve the situation a bit quicker? And then the guy pitching the movie would be like, I didn't do that because that would make them talk early, and then that would make a shorter movie, and then the other guy's just like, okay, that makes sense, and then he just moves on from there. Now keep in mind, this next part's a very minor spoiler, but I don't think anybody is surprised about this, but just maybe they were thinking that sort of line with, if they killed the kids, because, you know, oh, that would shorten the movie, maybe. Just, speaking of which, none of our main characters actually die in this movie, and La Llorona is known for killing kids by drowning them. And she barely even seems to be trying to kill him. It just seems like that cliche, oh, I'm going to kill you, but I need to fuck around with you a little bit first so that the movie lasts longer. Also, you're protected by the plot, so, you know, you won't die, but I'm definitely going to act like that's my sole purpose in life. And I do believe that taking the folktale out of Mexico and putting it in America kind of takes away from a bit of what could have been done. I mean, even if it was basically the same film, it would have felt different, because most horror movies take place in America. It would have been so much more interesting if it was in like that region of Mexico that it took place in. I don't know which one it is. But, I don't know, we've seen so many horror movies that are set in California, of all places, especially Los Angeles. And, you know, just putting it in a different locale, like, you know, the ones that the stories are actually based out of, would, A, make more sense, and B, just, it would have felt like something new. And for my very last thought, if this movie was not actually in the Conjuring universe, then it would just look like a movie that was taking inspiration from some of James Wan's other horror films, including The Conjuring, of which many scenes and angles feel plucked out directly from the first Conjuring movie, only this time they copied and pasted a couple of other details, like different characters and a different locale, but basically it's the same camera angles, same editing, and it's kind of stupid. But, I don't know, it feels like it wants to have that look and feel of The Conjuring, but not as good, kind of insignificant in the long run, and really, if it wasn't for one character from the first Annabelle film showing up and basically reminding us, hey, I was in this movie, so, you know, it's in the same universe, I don't think anybody would have known and or cared. And those are all my thoughts on The Curse of La Llorona. In summary, this movie had potential, in my opinion, and not just because of the source material and everywhere that the story could have gone. It had some very stellar acting, and honestly, the first 20 minutes, despite it having some flaws in there, mostly with the expositional dialogue, it at least intrigued me. I was intrigued with where it was going, and I was invested, but the film focuses way too much on being a cookie-cutter jump scare experience with countless horror cliches and callbacks to the Conjuring films, and I'm talking about the good ones that were directed by James Wan. Both subtle cliches and callbacks, and also those that are blatantly obvious. It's a lackluster time in the theaters, and I recommend not wasting your money. Honestly, and this is going to be a bit of a rant, but I was more intrigued and entertained by the Hispanic family that was sitting right next to me and my wife. And that was because they decided to bring a young boy to the movie. It was almost 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and they brought somebody who looked like he was at most 9 years old, and they would not shut up for the first 10 minutes of the movie or so, mostly because the boy was obviously asking questions. I don't know, I don't speak Spanish well or at all, but I just know he had a questioning tone, and he sounded like he was asking questions. And they were speaking in normal volumes instead of hushed tones, or just simply being quiet like you should in a movie theater. And many of us were telling them to stop talking, and the only reason that they stopped talking was because the boy started crying because he got scared, and then they just all left randomly, like a minute or two after the first jump scare. But yeah, all I will say is that, all I will take from this movie is the memory of that family bringing a minor to a horror movie. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, please don't hesitate to hit that like button. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you can keep up to date with everything that goes on the channel. And also, don't forget to keep the conversation going down below. Go ahead, go in the comments section, just talk a little bit. Are you excited to see the movie if you haven't already seen it? If you've already seen it, what did you think? I really enjoy seeing what you guys think about the different topics and movies that I bring up on the channel. Now all that's left to do is just to say farewell until the next video, all you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.